Welcome to Autonomy Insiders, the show where global industry leaders in autonomous driving unpack their real-world insights. Today, with Oliver Nahon. Why is autonomous mobility strategically so important for Switzerland?
We have a really well-functioning railway system, and also the whole mobility system, I think, is really well-functioning. The issue is that it's saturated. And we see that at peak hours, we need to find alternatives. And we need to find alternatives that make sense, that can bring people from one point to another without increasing traffic, and also leveraging the existing infrastructure, but actually potentially missing a new route. And we are trying to address it, is the business viability, right? Business model. Because basically, we have technology, we have regulation, but what's missing is large scaling. And for large scaling, we need to have incentives, and incentives often come from business, right?
Welcome back to Autonomy Insiders. And today we're taking a closer look at Switzerland, a country that increasingly becoming one of the most interesting test beds for autonomous driving in Europe. Over the past few years, we've seen a growing number of pilots, new regulatory frameworks, collaborations between global technology players and also local mobility operators. And to unpack what's happening on the ground, I'm joined today by Oliver Nahon, Director of Operations at the Swiss Association for Autonomous Mobility, or in short, SAAM. And in this conversation, we will discuss the Swiss regulatory framework for autonomous driving, the growing number of pilot projects across the country, also the role of the international players like Baidu or WeRide, and what Switzerland's experience can teach the broader European AV ecosystem. So, Oliver, welcome, and I'm really happy to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for having me, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm looking forward to introduce everything that's happening in Switzerland. Believe me, lots is happening. So thank you very much for the space, and looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, really excited. So to start, maybe let's set the stage for listeners who may not be yet familiar with SAAM. So what is the Swiss Association for Autonomous Mobility and why was it founded?
Yeah, so basically, SAAM was founded in the context where there were lots of autonomous pilot projects running around Switzerland. There were lots of different autonomous shuttles. At the time, it was mainly Navia and EasyMile shuttles. The first autonomous vehicle that was running on public roads in Switzerland was back in 2015. In fact, it was the first authorized autonomous vehicle on public roads in Europe. And since then, there have been a number of autonomous shuttles running. The first was PostAuto in Sion, and then followed some in Geneva, Fribourg, Zurich, Schaffhausen, Bern, Zug. So there were basically shuttles running all over Switzerland. And in this context, we thought it made sense to bundle up all the competences, all the experience we gained from the different projects under one hat. And this was SAAM. So basically, SAAM was founded in 2019, December 2019, with different founding members. And in this context, it really made sense to basically have dialogues between our members, between our different projects, and really learn from one another. And since then, SAAM basically took another dimension. Since its foundation, or now over 6 years ago, SAAM is more about facilitating projects in Switzerland. We also support regulations and policies. We help to raise awareness on a political level, but also on a public level. And basically, SAAM, I would say, is about creating momentum in the topic of autonomous vehicles in Switzerland.
Yeah, sounds good. And maybe from your perspective, why is autonomous mobility strategically so important for Switzerland?
Basically, in Switzerland, we have a really well-functioning railway system, and also the whole mobility system, I think, is really well-functioning. The issue is that it's saturated. And we see that at peak hours, we easily have traffic jams. And also, it's difficult to add more trains on the railway system simply because of, the whole saturation. So we need to find alternatives. And we need to find alternatives that make sense, that can bring people from one point to another without increasing traffic, and also leveraging the existing infrastructure, let it be railway infrastructure, public transport infrastructure, road infrastructure. And it seems to us that actually autonomous vehicles answer to all of this context.
And to regulate autonomous vehicles, Switzerland also recently enacted an ordinance on automated driving that permits level 3 hands-free driving on highways and even fully driverless level 4 vehicles, so on authorized roads under remote supervision. Can you briefly walk us through how the ordinance is structured and what does it explicitly regulate?
Sure. So yeah, basically, I think with this context I just mentioned, the idea now is to push the topic a bit more. And I think our regulators and policymakers did a really good job in shaping a regulation that really makes sense for the Swiss context. It was also inspired, I need to also emphasize this, it was inspired by the German regulation and also the French. But Switzerland went a bit further and took a pragmatic approach. So I'm going to address it now. Basically, the Swiss regulation came into force last year on the 1st of March, 2025, under the ordinance. And basically, it's structured in three pillars. We have the first one, which is level 3 autonomous vehicles running on highways. For this, basically, there's a whole takeover request from the vehicle when it's in autopilot mode, when it's in level 3 mode. The takeover request basically needs to be executed by the vehicle, and the driver needs to take over the vehicle with no further delay. This is what is written in the ordinance. And this also raises new questions. What if you are reading a book or talking to other passengers, or looking outside the countryside, the beautiful Swiss countryside, as a vehicle is driving itself, and all of a sudden it asks you to take the vehicle to take over the vehicle again? And the question is basically how to optimize this reaction time. And this is still an open question. So yeah, basically this is the first pillar. The second pillar is autonomous driving car parks. Basically, it's public car parks where you would have mixed traffics between manually driven vehicles and autonomous vehicles. The idea is really for you to enter the entrance of the car park. You ask your vehicle to drive itself, and then you can go you do your shopping, do your activities, come back at the car park, and then the vehicle will come and pick you up afterwards. And this is basically authorized by the canton. So I think this is also a very interesting, use case. I think there's lots of potential here. We also have, companies in Switzerland working exactly on this use case. For example, Embotech, he works on autonomous valet parking. And then the third pillar is what interests us the most. It's actually having driverless vehicles, right? So this is now regulated. It's now, we can now actually have, theoretically speaking, driverless vehicles running in Switzerland. They basically need to respect three conditions. They need to be authorized by the canton. They need to be type approved on a European level, and of course, authorized by Switzerland. And thirdly, the remote operator, well, they need to be remotely supervised. They cannot be remotely driven, but they need to be remotely supervised. So we're talking here not about a remote supervisor for one vehicle. We're really talking about one for 2, one for 5, or one for 20 plus. So we're really talking about remote supervision, and the remote supervisor needs to be based in Switzerland. So this, in a nutshell, are the three conditions for driverless vehicles to be deployed in Switzerland.
Yeah, interesting. Especially the last point that the remote supervisors need to be in Switzerland. I think Waymo had also some backlash in the news in the latest weeks because of that, because they had remote supervisors in the Philippines, and you have directly in your ordinance that they need to be in Switzerland. So is it then to reduce latency and to ensure safety, to keep maybe also jobs in Switzerland? Do you know the background why they need to be in Switzerland?
I think everything you just mentioned is the reason why Switzerland is key, basically, to having remote supervisors. As you said, safety, potential latency, dependency, sovereignty, and job creation, of course.
Right. Makes sense. So, um, you also mentioned that SAM has a focus area also in contributing to the legal and regulatory frameworks for AVs. Um, how has SAM engaged with policymakers during the journey to this new ordinance on autonomy to drive?
Yeah, so we've had different exchanges with the Federal Road Office, which, by the way, do an amazing job. We have to say, right, I think we're really lucky in Switzerland to have such a dynamic federal office for roads and authorizations. And we've had many exchanges. We also are part of expert groups, and we also provide consultancy during the consultancy periods. Basically, we're here to support, and we also give lots of feedback. We also give the requirements from our members, really provide basically the view from not not only the industry, but from the whole ecosystem, actually. And I think it really helps to shape regulation.
Makes sense. And now with this ordinance, with SAAM involved, we are clearly seeing increasing activity in Switzerland. So PostAuto working with Baidu Apollo, Uber announcing plans to launch in Zurich. We have also WeRide deploying in the Zurich region. So it feels like there is a strong momentum building in Switzerland. Maybe can you walk us through the key pilot projects that are currently active in Switzerland? Maybe also what are the different models, use cases, and also maturity levels?
Pleasure. Basically, so also for the context, we need to know that up to now, there have been 33 autonomous vehicles deployed in Switzerland. All of them were under the pilot project framework. And in fact, all the projects you mentioned here are still under this pilot project framework, simply because for the time being, there have not been any type approved autonomous vehicles in Europe. And as a result, they do not fall under this new ordinance. So within this pilot project framework, we do have actually many new pilot projects that will be launching up actually this year, and we will see them actually driving driverless next year. Also, maybe I'd like to point out that it's interesting in Switzerland, within this pilot project framework, we can also have driverless vehicles running with literally no drivers on board. In fact, the startup Loxo was the first in Europe to have a autonomous vehicle on public roads, driverless. There was no cockpit. It was a delivery vehicle running near Lucerne. And so yeah, it really shows that once again, the Federal Road Office is very open to innovation. So that's really, really good. And basically the different projects are the following. In Zurich, near Zurich, there's a region called Vortal, where there will be a dozen autonomous vehicles and shuttles that will be deployed. They will be integrated into public transport. And in fact, the SBB, so the National Railway Company of Switzerland, in collaboration with the Canton of Zurich, are actually backing this project, and it is led by the Swiss Transit Lab. And the idea is really to have people use existing public transport, trains, where autonomous vehicles would bring them from their household directly to the nearest train station. And as a result, the idea is for people to avoid using their own private vehicle to go to city centers. So that's the first project. There's another project that's been set up for some time now. It's in Bern. So the Loxo startup based in Bern and Fribourg, with one delivery vehicle also going to be driverless very soon. It's still running with a safety driver today, but you can go and see it. They have open days, and it runs frequently every week on public roads of Bern. So that's a really, really interesting project. Basically, I know you might have some investors listening to this, and I think the use case is really interesting because basically it's the idea of bringing it's middle mile delivery, right? This use case, and in fact they've validated their business model. So I think it's really worth mentioning the whole use case behind it, because it's one of the rare autonomous vehicles where the business model has actually been validated, scientifically speaking. As there is a return on investment, the idea is really to scale up. Basically, you have goods coming by train to the local cargo station. These goods are then dispatched using this middle mile autonomous vehicle to the last mile electric motorbikes. And these electric motorbikes basically go and feed the goods to the different households. And what's innovative here is basically this interaction between the middle mile and the last mile, between the autonomous vehicle and the electric motorbike, where we name this a dynamic micro hub. It's going to be meeting points rather than centralized logistics platforms or hubs. So this is really a dynamic meeting point called the dynamic micro hub. And this will result in much more efficiency, less infrastructure, and on-demand delivery, which will change the whole way of delivering in urban spaces. So I think this is a really, really interesting use case. I also wanted to emphasize this. And as a result, they will also be scaling to other cities. Some major announcements will be coming soon from this end. And then currently, there's also another autonomous vehicle project running. It's a bus with the ADAS-Tech technology, called a cars and bus, and it's basically running in the region of Alban under the lead of TTA. And the idea is basically for this autonomous bus. It's a normal standard bus, autonomous. It will basically go around in the city center, and you can actually use it now. It's open to the public, and there's still a safety driver inside, but the idea is to remove the safety driver and have it remotely supervised. And of course, we have this great major project from PostAuto and Baidu, where basically they will have 25 autonomous vehicles deployed, driverless, of course. The first tests have been conducting in this year, and in 2027, they will be opening this up to commercial services, and passengers can therefore really step into literally ride these driverless vehicles. And the idea here is to basically serve remote areas, rural areas, to really improve the public transport there in the context where the public transport is missing. The public transport operating there are actually not efficient, and the idea is really to find these inefficient or non-economically viable bus lines and replace them by other solutions such as autonomous vehicles on demand, which could really improve the accessibility to people. And then there's also an additional project which will be deployed soon in Geneva. The TPG with the Ultimo EU project will be deploying a dozen autonomous shuttles on demand, integrated into the TPG public transport, and people can literally just order them like an on-demand app using the TPG Flex app, which actually is already running today. They basically use manually driven shuttles today, but in the future, these will be completed by these autonomous shuttles. So on-demand integrated autonomous shuttles in in the TPG ecosystem. And what I like about all these different projects is that they all have different use cases. And as a result, we can really test out which ones make sense, which ones can answer which needs, which ones could be pursued, and which ones maybe have less opportunities. And I'd also like to emphasize that we have lots of other projects that are actually in discussion. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose them currently, but I am really, really looking forward to also have these new announcements coming soon. But maybe in terms of vision, I think it's safe to say that in the next 2 years, we will have about 100 autonomous vehicles running on Swiss roads.
And maybe one follow-up questions to your pilot project framework, because you mentioned all these deployments that you now mentioned are still under this pilot project framework. And you mentioned that this pilot project framework also allows for driverless level 4 vehicles to drive on public roads. Does this pilot project framework also allows for fare charging services, for example, in the WeRide or PostAuto pilot? So is there fare charging involved, or are they then free for the pilot phase and transition later to a fare charging service?
Basically, up to now, there was no charging. It was free for users to use these services. They're innovative, they're trials, they're pilots. So yeah, the idea is really to have them free. But with these new projects, some will be actually charged. So there will be a fee, there will be a commercial service, and this also will be new, indeed. I cannot say much more about this, but yes, to answer your question, yes, there will be a service behind it.
Interesting. And what we're now also seeing is that in a lot of these pilot projects, we're seeing Chinese AV players involved. So we have WeRide, we have Baidu. And from your perspective, how significant is this shift for the Swiss AV ecosystem?
So yeah, the question of Chinese manufacturers. So I get it a lot, and it's absolutely normal. And I think the focus shouldn't be only on the AV supplier, right? It should be on the whole ecosystem. Basically, we shouldn't forget that in order to run autonomous vehicles, you need an operator, you need remote supervisors, you need also safety drivers in the beginning. You need a whole infrastructure behind it. You need consultants, you need bodies who help with the authorizations, you need companies to help with the mapping. And the AV supplier is just one piece of the puzzle. And actually, what we're seeing now in Switzerland is that we are creating jobs. We are helping the growth, the economy, and we are actually addressing the questions that we raised at the beginning of this podcast, meaning the saturation of traffic. So today, we are not focusing on the AV suppliers as such. We are focusing on growing the whole ecosystem around autonomous vehicles. And for sure, today we have Chinese technologies which are mature, which are ready to be used, which are here on the market. And in the future, they will be competed by European technologies and Swiss technologies, right? Which will be as mature and maybe even more reliable. I don't know. We'll see. And if that's the case, then there, potentially this piece of the puzzle will be replaced by local solutions, by European technologies. But in the meantime, we will have developed the whole ecosystem. We will have created jobs. We will have already addressed some big questions about AVs integrated into public transport, for example, or logistics use case. So we're gaining time. We're gaining time, and we are using the technologies that exist, but we are not limited to them, of course.
Makes sense. So not waiting until something European comes across, but rather start early, learn early. Afterwards, if there's European alternatives, you can always think about it. So no long-term dependency risk on the Swiss side of things.
Exactly. I think so. The idea here is basically to emphasize on creating a new service. This is what we want to do at the end. We want to generate value for the population and create new services. And this is what we want to focus on.
Makes sense. And what do you think why Switzerland is so attractive for these Chinese AV players? So they could choose probably from a lot of countries, but they chose Switzerland. So what do you think what makes Switzerland so attractive to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are different aspects. I think having SAAM as very dynamic national platform, really helping and growing and building this momentum. I think it helps for international actors to come and have this simplified way to launch projects in Switzerland. Of course, the regulations as well. It really shows the mindset we are in Switzerland. And basically, Switzerland, I think, is well known for its innovation. We have lots of top universities. In fact, we have got different, many big international companies, not only Chinese, right? US, European, who are actually based in Switzerland for their research and development. So many of these actors are actually setting up offices in Switzerland. So this is also part of the ecosystem, of course. And I would say lastly, for the geopolitical reasons, I think, as well. Switzerland being neutral has also the stability, maybe less dependency on, European aspects or the US trade issues we all know. And Switzerland has a bit of a more stepped back approach. It remains quite pragmatic. And I think this is something that is of interest for international actors as well.
Absolutely makes sense. Yeah. And maybe another topic that also always comes into mind when talking about autonomous vehicles and also Chinese virtual driver companies is data. So the data handling is often a really sensitive topic, especially in Europe. And is there also something in the ordinance that regulates how the data that is collected while driving is handled, so where it's localized and that it cannot be moved to other countries or something like that?
Basically, Switzerland has its own GDPR, but it's more or less, it's very similar, right? We are based on the GDPR, the European GDPR. And, I can tell you that the projects are 100% compliant to the GDPR. Okay, they're 100% compliant. All data regarding people is anonymized. And basically, this data, I even had this discussion recently with one of the projects, and basically, yeah, they go even further than the actual regulation asks. The regulation asks for 99.9% anonymization of faces of data, and they go actually to 99.999%, even more. It's just that obviously there might be one case one day where it's not the case, and as a result, it's kind of a way to protect. But what I'm saying is that basically everything is anonymized, and I think it really is important to mention that. And regarding data itself, I mean, for these companies to understand the new ecosystem or the landscape, the ODD, the TOD, they need to learn, right? And it makes sense, for mapping aspects or certain, data that is basically used for these companies, whether American, European, or Chinese, to simply use them to learn and improve, right? And if that's not the case, we cannot, it's going to be difficult to deploy these autonomous vehicles, I mean, it's a question of common sense, right? If we want to have an efficient and mature autonomous vehicle running on roads, they need to be safe, and as a result, we need to make it so that the data there is used in a learning way, in a learning approach. So yeah, I really want to emphasize that everything is compliant. There is also, uh, this is a really important topic in Switzerland. And of course, the question of data is really, really important. There are also, for the different projects, data which is stored locally as well. So yeah.
And you also mentioned that Switzerland has a strong public transport. And how do public transport operators and also taxi association and maybe also municipalities feel about those AV pilots? Are they curious to experience that, or are they more afraid that it may replace them or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. Right? Some actors, even when I talk to this about, with my friends, the first reaction is, "Oh, but it's going to take jobs." But actually, it's not the case. It's the opposite. In Switzerland, like in Europe, we have a driver shortage. In Switzerland, us drivers actually have a very senior. On average, I think they're about, I don't have the exact number, but I think they're about 55 years old on average. So, what will happen in 10 years when they will potentially be retired, right? So it's not a question of taking jobs. It's the opposite. It's a question of anticipating the future. And we also want to provide new services. We also want to improve the mobility system. As said, it's saturated. We need to find new solutions, right? And, uh, this awareness is really important. And of course, we have some cities, some cantons who are extremely proactive, who really see a huge potential in the topic. And others, it's not that they didn't see potential, it's that they are not aware about how fast the topic is coming. And I would say it's also SAAM's mission, right, to help with this awareness, to help stakeholders to understand what it takes, what the positive impacts could be, how to address ongoing questions. And, we are working in projects which actually studies the positive impact of AVs and the impact on jobs as well. And we're actually seeing a pretty positive impact altogether. And, it gets back to what we were saying with the whole ecosystem. We're creating a new ecosystem, meaning new jobs, new economic growth, new services, new everything. So this question of awareness, I think it's just a temporary question. As a result, I think in the next few years, we won't be addressing this question anymore about awareness. I think it's just, this phase where we are deploying a new solution, which is, very groundbreaking, cars with no driver. I mean, it's absolutely new and kind of crazy when you think about it for some people. Um, but yeah, it doesn't mean that they won't adopt it. It means that there's still some time for them to understand the technology and understand the impact, what it can bring, and the opportunities it can create for its populations.
So it's good that Sam is there to educate everyone about autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, this is what we're trying to achieve exactly. I think it's important, and we don't see ourselves as a lobbyist putting pressure on all stakeholders. No, the technology, we see it as very beneficial. It's really going to be extremely important for society. It's going to help a lot on lots of different levels. As we said, in Switzerland, we're working on many different use cases, and we're simply testing out and seeing which ones make sense. So yeah, I think it's really about not pushing, but educating. And this is exactly what we're trying to do.
So let's maybe zoom out a bit from Switzerland and look at the broader European ecosystem. And here it's often said that Europe risks lagging behind the US and China in autonomous vehicles. We know those countries have companies that have logged tens of millions of driverless miles, whereas Europe has mostly smaller scale pilots. And from your point of view, what is the state of the European AV ecosystem right now?
Yeah, I like your question because coming from a non-EU member state, Switzerland, I like this question about Europe. Maybe it's interesting because maybe we can observe it with a step back. So maybe it's also interesting to have my perspective on this. But yeah, potentially, I think Europe, technologically speaking, I might not have the best actors currently, but I think it is working on it. I have been to different conferences where the mindset was pretty negative. We were comparing ourselves to Waymo or Baidu or whomever. But actually, we have lots of amazing AV actors in Europe. We have, Wave, we have Loxo, we have Invotech in Switzerland, we have Postech, we have Moya. and I'm missing many, we have loads. And if I were to list them, it would probably take the whole hour of the podcast, right? So we have lots and lots of amazing actors in Europe, and we're still, I think for us Europeans, I mean, as a Swiss, I also count myself in as a European. Um, we want reliability, we want safety, we want to be cautious, and we also know our market really well. So I really would trust an AV manufacturer in Europe to know exactly what is needed in Europe in terms of reliability, in terms of needs from the users, potentially more than an international actor. So I would be a bit more optimistic on this regard. And then there's also this question of harmonization, right? Harmonizing the European regulatory framework. So, I mean, this is, I think, a huge question, and maybe I'd like to address it really quickly. Basically, in my view, with the Swiss regulation at least, we see that we are quite pragmatic. We use the type approval technical framework, for authorizing for homologating autonomous vehicles in Switzerland. Okay. So basically, on a European level, this type approval framework exists already, right? So we have a technical harmonized framework that's been existing since 2022. And in my view, it seems that we can just use it, right? I mean, it's there. And, we always go into the direction that there is a fragmented framework in Europe. And it is the case in terms of maybe traffic regulations, but in terms of technical homologation, I would say that things are harmonized. And that's been the case since 2022. Of course, we are still working on a process. We are still working on what it actually means to homologate an autonomous vehicle. This is being done. Hopefully, we will see the first autonomous vehicles to be type approved, hopefully either this year or next year. But yeah, I think the technical framework is there for Europe. Then, of course, each country will have to authorize the homologated European autonomous vehicles. That makes sense, but it's there. So in terms of harmonization, I think we're really on a good track. In my perspective, what's actually potentially missing in Europe, and we are trying to address it, is the business viability, right? Business model. Because basically, we have technology, we have regulation, but what's missing is large scaling. And for large scaling, we need to have incentives, and incentives often come from business, right? And when you look at what's happening today, there's a testbed initiative which actually aims to deploy cross-border projects around different countries in Europe, right? This is really good, and potentially there could be European funding for this, and this could help actors to develop in this field as well, European actors, of course. So I really think this as a very good opportunity. And I think Europe is not lagging that much behind as we think it is. Again, we have technology, we have regulations, we will have hopefully business models very soon. And in terms of adoption, we have lots of amazing associations all over Europe that also help to educate population. Yeah, I'm actually pretty optimistic, I have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point you mentioned about the UNECE type approval regulation that already exists, and you made this point also at the European Parliament, where you pointed out exactly that, and that Switzerland is also using that EU-based framework to deploy these. So, what were the reactions to your point?
I mean, it wasn't exactly it was at an event taking place at the European Parliament, organized by Deputy Pier Francesco Maran. I think it was a really, really good event because we could also, address such topics. And to my surprise, actually, there was a common, acknowledgement of this statement. I have to say, I did discuss it with members of the DG Grow EU Commission, and they actually fully agreed with me. They thought that it was great that Switzerland was using this UNEC type approval framework, and that indeed other European countries should maybe also use it more.
Looking ahead to 2026, it now has often been described as a pivotal year for autonomous mobility in Europe. What are you most excited or optimistic about as we enter this year? And are there upcoming milestones or initiatives, maybe also Switzerland or European wide, that you believe that will be a game changer for Europe?
A lot, actually, I have to say. So this is my optimistic reaction, right? But a lot of things are happening. What I'm really looking forward to see is basically we have SAAM in Switzerland, of course, but in other countries we also see different SAAM organizations being set up. For example, in Austria we have SAAM Austria now. SAAM Denmark as well has been created. There are discussions for potentially SAAM Germany. In Belgium, they're also looking into a similar organization, in France as well. And we also try to support these countries in enabling such national associations, because the way I see it is that national associations have a direct impact on policymakers and on project facilitation. They can really help to deploy projects on a national level. And we also have initiatives like Pave Europe and Pave UK who act more on a continental approach. And this is also really important because it also spreads a message on a European level about the positive impacts AVs could have. And then in terms of project announcements, I think there will be many, many new projects being announced all over Europe, and especially in Switzerland. That I can guarantee. And maybe above all, we will be organizing on the 4th and 5th of May, the Automated Mobility Summit. This is going to be a big event where autonomous vehicles, for the first time in Europe and maybe in worldwide, to my knowledge, for the first time, autonomous vehicles will be operating at an event. There will be different manufacturers operating. I can tell you some for a bit of teasing. There will be Pixmoving, there will be Loxo, Starship, and some others that will be announced very soon. And people can basically go from one vehicle to another, try them out. They'll be driverless. They'll be running on a private area. It's going to be a bit more straightforward in terms of authorization. And in parallel to these showcases, there will be really interesting panels and keynote and presentations throughout this 2-day event. We even will have top-level ministers that will be coming to the event, top-level politicians, CEOs, lots of experts in the industry from all over Europe. So we're actually really looking forward to welcome all the community, all the AV community at this event for 5 May in Zurich. And we also welcome any non-experts, right? Any people who would simply like to try out autonomous vehicles, robotaxis on a closed area. This is the occasion, right? This is the opportunities. Yeah, we would really, really love to see as many people as possible.
Absolutely. And I'm also really looking forward to this event because I will also be there in Zurich. So, for our listeners, if you want to connect with me in person, if you want to have a chat and are near Switzerland, then yeah, please come to the event. I would love to connect with all of you in person and then together enjoy the experience of autonomous vehicles in Europe on European ground. Yeah, so really looking forward to this event and thank you for making that happen.
Yeah, we have an amazing team in SAAM. I think we're all working very, very actively. We're very passionate, and these kind of initiatives come when you have passionate people working. So we're really lucky to count on this really, really amazing team. And of course, all our members are very supportive. They are very engaged as well. So yeah, I really hope this event will be at the image of all our passion. And I hope so.
So, Oliver, thank you really much for this insightful conversation and this detailed look into Switzerland's autonomous vehicle landscape. I think it was a really insightful conversation, and I'm also looking forward to have you back on if you have more updates on the pilots, if you can announce more projects, and then we will have a second version of that, and really looking forward to that. So, thank you, Oliver, for taking the time today.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for having me. And it was a pleasure to be here. And of course, I'm already looking forward to the follow-up podcast with more announcements to be made, for sure.
Perfect. See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.